I grew up in the Midwest United States. During the 90s, my family lived in a tight-knit community, and we would often have get-togethers and barbecues with our neighbors. It was truly the American dream. My brother and I were very good friends with all the kids from our neighborhood, and whenever we'd have one of these gatherings, all the kids would get together for a game of manhunt. To avoid any of the back and forth of who would be chosen as the hider and the seekers, my brothers and I would usually volunteer to be the seekers. There was this giant forest area outside of our neighborhood where the games would take place, and since we would often go fishing with my dad around this area, we knew it pretty well. You could say we were all very competitive. I remember it was the 4th of July, 1996. The entire community threw a party at the neighborhood park, and of course, this meant that we kids were going to have our traditional game of manhunt, one of the biggest we've ever had, and it would take place after the fireworks show. By the time the fireworks stopped, I'd say it was around 9:30 p.m. Shortly after, we gathered everyone for a game and began around 9:45. Things started out like any other game. We caught most of the low-level hiders within the first 10 minutes. However, there were still some of the older kids hiding out in some of the more obscured areas of the park. We were always told never to go too deep into the woods. To give you some perspective, the park we were at was at the very back of our neighborhood. Beyond that was the forest that went on for about 3 miles before you got to the highway that led into town. There was no hunting allowed in this forest because of its proximity to residential areas, so we would often see a lot of deer and other animals roaming about. Anyways, the game went on for a while longer, and despite their best efforts, we apprehended most of the hiders, except for a girl who was about 8 years old. We'll call her Ashley. I found this to be very odd because Ashley wasn't the best hider. We made our way to the small lake besides the clubhouse. This was the last area we would check before letting someone know that we couldn't find Ashley. It was about this time that I began to feel this sinking feeling in my stomach. I was only 11 years old at the time, but I could tell there was something wrong. I distinctly remember seeing the moon reflecting brightly upon the surface of the water as we made our way around the lake. When we got to the far side of the lake, we started hearing a strange noise coming from within the trees. It sounded like someone was being brutally stabbed over and over again, but no screams were accompanying the awful sound. The 3 of us approached the tree line. When my brother pointed his flashlight into the trees, we saw a hooded figure with its back turned to us. They appeared to be kneeling down and stabbing at something with a large hunting knife. As soon as the beam of light fell upon the figure, it immediately stopped what it was doing and stood up. The next thing I remember is my oldest brother covering my eyes with his free hand and telling us to run back to the park. The 3 of us took off and ran towards the party. I remember hearing the sounds of thudding boots tearing through the bush behind us. And as soon as we got back to the party, my older brother told my dad about the man in the woods. The rest of the night is a blur to me. I only remember seeing the police showing up, and me falling asleep in my dad's arms. The next morning I was told that Ashley ended up leaving with her parents while the game was still going on, which explains why we couldn't find her. I didn't get a good look at what the hooded man had been stabbing at, but my brother told me it was a deer carcass. Looking back, I suppose we could just chalk it up to someone hunting in a restricted area. But there's still something that bothers me. What kind of person rapidly stabs at a dead deer in the dark? And even though he was nowhere to be seen by the time we got back to the party, I'm certain that he was chasing us, at least for a short distance. It makes me wonder what he would have done if he caught us. That was the very last game of manhunt our neighborhood ever played.
It happened when I was in middle school. One day my family decided to visit my mother's parents' house after a long time. The house was located in a rural area. There's a big road with a convenience store and a gas station around my grandparents' house. And down there in the middle is a small trail that takes a long walk to get there. It was located in the most isolated part of the village. So whenever I walked along the trail, All I could see was a bamboo forest, or a large area of rice paddies, fields, and streetlights. And the streetlights are all worn out, so only a few of them are operating properly. As soon as we arrived, I greeted my grandparents and had a really nice and delicious meal with them. Well, it was pretty good then. The next evening, all the relatives gathered at my grandparents' house. My parents and others said that they were going to see the nightscape of the night sea with my grandparents. But at that time, my cousin and I weren't interested in that much, so we decided to stay at home. We were chatting for a while, and it suddenly started to rain. Then my mom called me to check the door and go to bed early, saying that they were going to stay the night in one of the relatives' houses because it was too late to go back. So we were sitting back and chatting and watching TV. Some kinds of that after checking if we locked the door well. After a while, my cousin kept pestering me, saying that he's hungry. I said, "Hey, would you like to go to buy some snacks together? There's a convenience store over there." "No, I'm scared to go out right now." Well, my cousin was such a coward boy. And in my case, I wasn't scared at all. I could walk at night or watch horror movies by myself. Eventually, I ended up coming out alone to get some snacks for him. Light drizzle was falling at that time, so I left the porch without an umbrella and stared at the trail. And at that very moment, I felt really weird. I got goosebumps at first. However, I soon ignored it and went straight to the convenience store to buy some snacks. I mean, everything was fine until then. As soon as I left the convenience store, the rain poured heavily. Holy crap, I should have brought an umbrella. Mumbling like that, I started to rush to the house. At that instant, the lightning suddenly flashed. Slowly frightened, I started running faster. When I reached the middle of the trail, I saw the muddy road and the broken streetlights. And something was dropping over the muddy road. I couldn't see it clearly because it was too dark around, but something like a pebble kept falling under the streetlights. And when I looked up at the streetlight, my heart literally sank. I saw a silhouette of a person hanging upside down on a streetlight and holding on its column. It was a woman, and she was hanging like a monkey. You know what I mean. I was so surprised that I couldn't try to run away, just stared blankly at her. At that moment, there was another flash of lightning, and every time it flashed, the woman's face was clearly seen. Her crying face, smiling face, and a face with no expression. Looking at that face, my body was cold and stiff. I couldn't move my legs at all. The lightning stopped soon, and I couldn't see the woman anymore because the surrounding of the trail was dark again. I then started screaming and rushing toward home. It was then she was laughing out loud. Shoot, if I turn around, she'll kill me, for sure. I ran like a crazy person, and when I got to the house, I screamed, hitting the front door with my body. My cousin came out, opened the door, and asked me if I saw a ghost or something. But I couldn't tell him what I saw because I was afraid he might be scared. I was thinking if I should call my parents to come over quickly, but somehow I didn't think they would believe me. So I just thought I might have seen something wrong, and eventually decided to sleep like that. But I couldn't sleep well that night. I kept feeling weird. There was a bamboo forest right next to the window in the room, and the sound of bamboo leaves hitting the window was so creepy. Feeling uncomfortable, I turned to the window. And there was someone else. Someone was standing by the window looking inside our room. I couldn't scream again. Covering myself with blanket, I was shivering and thinking I shouldn't move. But then I heard a strange sound of a song. I didn't know exactly what song he was singing, but his trembling voice gave me goosebumps enough. It had been singing like that for a while, and then it started knocking on the window. Open the door. It was neither a woman nor a man. Knock, knock. Open the door. Knock, knock. Open the door. It kept talking like that in a deep, low voice. But suddenly, "Open the door!" It was howling in an extremely high voice, and soon the voice was turning into laughter. I recognized that the laugh was exactly the same voice I heard when I'd run off the trail a few hours ago. I had no choice but waited for the sound to disappear, and I guess I fell asleep so faintly. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of the phone ringing. At first, I was even afraid about the sound of a ringtone, so I didn't come out from my blanket until Mom and the other adults came back. After a few hours, my cousin suddenly approached me and said like this, "Hey, did you hear anything strange last night?" To my surprise, my cousin also heard that weird song, knocking sound, and the laughter yesterday. So, it was not a dream. At first, we were planning to stay one more day, but I begged my parents to go back home and I could come home right away that day. What the heck was that thing I saw on the trail that day? Do you think it followed me? Well, it's still a mystery that hasn't been solved to this day.
This happened when I was in college. One day, I decided to sleep at my friend's house. After having fun eating takeout with my friend and chatting for a while, we both laid down to sleep. Then I suddenly started hearing the sound of a wooden percussion that is typically used in Korean temples. However, as my friend and I were sincere Buddhists, I just laughed and then fell asleep, thinking it was a hallucination. About a month later, I met her again at a cafe near her house, and I made a joke. "Hey, did you turn on the Buddhist broadcast at your house that day? I kept hearing the sound of a wooden instrument when I slept over at your house." Then my friend suddenly looked serious and asked me if I heard it, and she abruptly called her mother, trembling. "Hey, Mom, my friend heard it too. What should I do now?" In confusion, I asked what was going on, and my friend suddenly cried and said, "I keep experiencing sleep paralysis ever since I started living in that house. I've been suffering this for 5 months, not 1 or 2 days. I can't live like this anymore." She then confessed that she'd been staying at a nearby motel. It was fine at first, but she started to have sleep paralysis more and more, even when she was in the motel. I was so surprised when she told me this. To reassure her, I told her to pack up right away, check out of the motel, and come to my house. Then she cried even harder this time, and she said she's too scared to enter that house by herself. She asked me to go with her, so we took a taxi and went back to her house. However, the moment I went into her house, I thought I was going to cry too, and I was sure that something was wrong. As soon as I opened the door, I suddenly smelled rotten water. My friend had a goldfish at the time, and there wasn't even a drop of water left in the fish tank. The fish was dried up and laid there dead. We ran out of the house without even thinking about packing her stuff up. We didn't go back to my house right away. Instead, we wandered around the crowded streets for a long time before returning. When we finally returned to my house, we both sat on my bed, thinking for a long time about what we had to do, and then fell asleep. When I woke up the next morning, I noticed that there were several missed calls from my mom. When I called her back, she asked me, "Are you at home with someone right now?" "Why, Mom?" I asked her, almost crying out of fear, and then she told me about her dream. In her dream, a tall, skinny, and abnormally big-eyed man was looking through my window in black clothes. "Why isn't she coming out? Why? 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 Why?" He muttered this while watching me. Mom ran towards him shouting, "What are you doing?" Then she suddenly woke up from her dream. So I was honest and confessed to my mom about my friend's house, and she told me not to go anywhere with her. She lived in my house for about a month. One of her mother's relatives was a shaman, and she suddenly got mad when she talked about her daughter, and then advised my friend to stay close to me. I think her house might have been possessed by a ghost. I thought about why he couldn't come inside my house. I guess it's because my mom bought some ceremonial salt before I moved into this house. And one of my relatives, who was a monk, once visited my house to pray for me while I was away. Maybe that's why. My friend later told me that she had moved out of the house, and the owner actually accepted her request without any complaints. I think cheap houses like those always have a legitimate reason. And fortunately, she's doing very well now.
My father's grandmother once told him a story of a man from the 1900s in Mexico that had a very heart-stopping experience. Said man, let's call him Jose, a very common Mexican name, loved to drink. So he and one of his friends are finishing drinking at a local bar one night. When they leave the bar, they say their goodbyes and go their separate ways for the evening. As I stated before, it's Mexico in the 1900s. For most people, you either traveled by your own 2 feet or by horse. Luckily for Jose, he had a horse. So off he went, back to his home late at night, taking the dirt trails. Along the way, he passes under a bridge. As he comes out the other side, he begins to hear what sounds like a child crying. He stops and gets off his horse. He looks in the direction of the crying. He soon finds the source of the crying. It's a little boy crying all alone. He asks the child if he's all right.
I'm lost. Can you help me?
Jose, of course, agrees to help the little boy, so he picks him up and places him on the rear of the saddle. He gets back on, and then they're on their way. As they travel along, Jose feels the little kid poke his back a few times. So Jose asks what's the matter. The young boy responds,
Daddy, look.
I grew teeth. When Jose looks back, he's face to face with a horrifying sight. What was once a little boy now sat a dark figure with rows of sharp, long white teeth, smiling at him, with a pair of eyes that radiated death itself. Turning white with fear, Jose's only reaction was to pull back the reins of the horse, which causes the horse to fall backwards. Luckily, he didn't get caught in the middle and just fell off the back. Jose wasted no time getting up and looking for his horse, but unfortunately the horse had been spooked and ran off into the night. Jose proceeded to do the same and hightail it out of there, not even daring to test his luck. He didn't look back. The following day, when his friend asked to go for some drinks, he said only a little, because he didn't want to stay too late.